Welcome, dear followers. How are you? Imagine, if you will, the village of Oak Haven, nestled deep in a valley where the river Cinder flows. It was a place where life moved with the quiet, predictable rhythm of the seasons, the air always smelling faintly of sawdust and river mist. The heart of this small community was the mill, a sturdy stone structure that had stood for 2 centuries, turning the harvest into life-sustaining flour. Its owner was a woman named Elara. She was a figure of quiet strength, known for her sharp business sense and her almost maternal care for the village itself. Now, picture this scene: the deep, velvet blackness of a late autumn night, so still you could hear the distant rustle of leaves falling. Suddenly, that stillness was brutally shattered. A searing orange glow pierced the darkness, swiftly followed by the terrifying, hungry roar of fire. The mill, the cornerstone of Oak Haven, was ablaze. Flames licked the night sky, their demonic dance casting huge flickering shadows over the horrified faces of the villagers who rushed from their beds. The inferno was swift and absolute. By dawn, only blackened stone and smoldering timbers remained. And within those devastating ruins, Ilara's life, it was confirmed, had been cruelly extinguished. If you enjoyed the story, please like and share. It was not a natural disaster, not in the eyes of the villagers. Fires happen, yes, but not to the mill, not to Ilara. There was a sense of profound disbelief, a cold dread that settled over Oak Haven like the ash. The official inquiry, conducted quickly by the nearest town magistrate, ruled it an unfortunate accident. A lamp knocked over, perhaps, a poorly maintained chimney flue. But the villagers exchanged glances that spoke volumes, their whispers coalescing into a single profound question. Ilara was meticulous. She was careful to a fault. How could such a simple accident claim her life and her livelihood so completely? The miller's dog, a scruffy terrier named Barnaby, had also vanished that night. This was a strange or unexpected detail that kept many awake. Barnaby had never left Ilara's side, guarding the mill with a fierce loyalty that was legendary. If the fire was an accident, a sudden tragedy, surely Barnaby would have raised the alarm, his frantic barking rousing the whole village. But there had been silence until the flames themselves began to speak. It was an absence that felt louder than any alarm bell. The collective loss, the sudden void left by Ilara's passing, was a palpable, heavy thing. Children wept openly, and the adults moved with a stunned, somber purpose, organizing the cleanup, speaking in hushed tones about their lost friend. The deepest grief, however, was mixed with a growing sense of unease. The magistrate had left, the official paperwork filed, but the villagers did not feel the customary closure. The mystery lingered in the scorched air. A farmer named Thomas recalled seeing a strange carriage pass through the village earlier that evening, one not belonging to any local family, its driver's face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, heading toward the mill road. He had dismissed it then as a late traveler, but now the memory took on a sinister coloring. Why would a stranger be traveling that lonely road so late? But was that really a stranger, or someone who had been there before? That mysterious question hung suspended, unanswered, in the smoke-tinged atmosphere.
The news of Ilara's death, traveling slowly beyond the valley's ridge, soon reached the ears of her only surviving relative, her nephew, Elias. A man of around 30, he lived a reserved, somewhat solitary life in the capital city, pursuing the study of law, a life far removed from the dirt and toil of a country mill. He had not visited Oak Haven since his childhood, and his connection to Ilara, his aunt, was distant, sustained only by brief, formal letters exchanged twice a year. Yet, as the sole heir, the inheritance was undeniable. He arrived a week after the fire, a figure of elegant, if somewhat somber attire, standing out sharply against the rustic, soot-stained backdrop of the village. His arrival itself was the beginning of the next wave of unease. Elias was a stranger, and to the tight-knit community of Oakhaven, he represented an intrusion. He was there to claim the mill, or what remained of it, and the substantial land surrounding the River Cinder. The villagers saw him not as a grieving relative, but as an opportunistic outsider, come to profit from their shared tragedy. This suspicion was amplified by his cold, methodical manner. He asked questions about the legalities of the fire, the insurance documentation, and the precise boundaries of the property, rather than inquiring about his aunt's final days or the impact of her loss on the community. This lack of a memorable emotional moment of shared grief only deepened the initial distrust. Elias, however, was not indifferent. He was simply intensely private, and his professional training dictated a structured approach to the chaos he found. He spent his first few days not in the relative comfort of the mill house, which was structurally sound but smoke-damaged, but walking the perimeter of the burnt-out mill itself. He was observing, measuring, and documenting the scene with the detached scrutiny of a lawyer preparing a case. He dismissed the magistrate's ruling of an accident as too simplistic, too convenient. How could a fire, which the official report claimed was started by a fallen oil lamp inside the main structure, have spread with such ferocity and speed that Ilara could not even escape from the adjacent office? One evening, as the sun dipped and cast long, eerie shadows across the wreckage, he heard the faint sound of barking, a strange or unexpected detail that caused him to pause. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable, the desperate, high-pitched yelping of a small dog. He followed the sound, which led him not towards the mill house, but down to the riverbank, perhaps a quarter-mile away. There, trapped in a narrow fissure between two moss-covered rocks, was Barnaby, the miller's terrier, gaunt and terrified, but alive. The dog was injured, his foreleg wrapped in a piece of faded, torn cloth. The cloth was not the kind used in the mill. It looked like a fragment of a coat, dark wool of a fine weave. Why was Barnaby so far from the mill? If he had simply fled the fire, he would have run towards the safety of the village. Why was he wrapped in fine cloth and injured? Elias carefully freed the dog and carried him back. The dog's eyes, when he looked at Elias, were filled with a frantic intelligence, as if trying desperately to communicate something beyond fear. Elias saw in those eyes the echo of the villagers' suspicion and his own nagging doubt. But was the dog trying to run from the fire or from someone who had started it? That mysterious question lodged itself firmly in Elias's methodical mind. He knew then that the simple inheritance was going to become a complex and demanding inquiry into the events of that fateful night. His purpose had shifted from claiming a ruin to seeking the truth for the woman he had barely known.
Elias, now with the injured Barnaby wrapped in a blanket at his temporary lodging, returned to the mill's ruins with a renewed, almost obsessive focus. The official inquiry had been cursory, treating the scene as a casualty of heat and flame. Elias, however, treated it as a puzzle box violently thrown against a wall. He spent the entire day carefully sifting through the layers of debris, the acrid smell of burnt wood and damp ash clinging to his clothes. He was searching for the origin point of the blaze, the spot where the fire had taken its initial catastrophic hold. The report claimed it was inside the ground floor, near the lamppost. Elias, crouching low, using his hands and a small garden trowel, moved with patience that bordered on ceremony. He finally reached the area the magistrate's men had cordoned off as the center of the incident. The stone floor here was significantly more cracked, the underlying earth baked to a reddish clay. As he cleared away a layer of fine, powdery ash, his trowel struck something hard, something that did not yield like stone or crumble like charcoal. He dug around it, brushing the debris away with meticulous care. What he uncovered was a strange or unexpected detail. A small, intricately carved wooden box, no larger than a man's palm, made of dark, heavy oak. It was charred on the outside, the heat having scorched the varnish, but it had not burned. The wood was so dense, so well crafted, that it had resisted the worst of the inferno. He lifted the box, its weight surprising him. It was completely empty, yet it smelled faintly of something metallic, not fire. This object, a wooden item that had survived a fire that had consumed a whole building, was the undeniable contradiction in the magistrate's narrative. Why would someone leave such a valuable, heat-resistant object inside the mill right at the alleged point of origin? The small box was not a tool, not a piece of machinery, nor a decorative object Ilara would typically possess. It felt like something left behind in haste, or perhaps something planted. This was a memorable, emotional moment for Elias. His detached legal curiosity morphed into a personal commitment. The evidence was tangible, held right there in his hand, mocking the simplicity of the official ruling. He turned the box over, examining its bottom. There, lightly etched into the uncharred center, was a symbol, a stylized A with a small crescent moon shape woven into the central crossbar. It was an unfamiliar mark, not belonging to any known mill or local trade guild. This symbol was the first physical clue that pointed away from accident and toward deliberate malice. Elias felt a cold certainty settle in his stomach. Someone had come to the mill that night with a purpose that involved more than a clumsy accident. He re-examined the layout of the destruction. The fire's most intense damage was focused here, at the mill's center, suggesting a deliberate application of a potent accelerant, one that would guarantee total destruction. He looked back at the charred box, then out towards the river where Barnaby had been found, and then in the direction of the main road. The pieces were still scattered and disjointed, but the shape of a crime, not an accident, was beginning to form in his mind. But was this box a relic of Ilara's past, or a calling card left by her attacker? That mysterious question drove him forward, making him an investigator rather than merely an heir. He carefully wrapped the small oak box and resolved to show it only to someone whose silence he could trust, someone deeply familiar with the true rhythm and hidden histories of Oakhaven.
Elias knew he could not proceed solely on the strength of a burnt wooden box and a dog found miles away. He needed context, the hidden texture of the village's recent history. He realized the person who held the key to Ilara's life, and perhaps her death, was Agnes, the oldest living resident of Oakhaven, the village elder. She lived in a small, isolated cottage bordering the great ancient forest, renowned for her sharp memory and her absolute discretion. The journey to her home was silent, the air heavy with the scent of pine and decay, reflecting Elias's own somber mood. Agnes received him with a cool politeness, her eyes the color of deep amber, missing nothing. Elias laid out his findings, the box, Barnaby's injury, but refrained from expressing his conclusions. He simply asked about Ilara's final months, hoping for a slip, a detail the official report had missed. Agnes listened, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her face unreadable. After a long silence, she provided a key flashback, a memorable emotional moment that cracked the surface of Oakhaven's calm. Agnes recalled a conversation she had overheard approximately 4 weeks before the fire. Ilara had been speaking in hushed, furious tones with a local landowner named Mr. Theron. Theron owned the sprawling farmlands on the opposite side of the river, and his family's prosperity relied heavily on Ilara's mill for grinding their immense harvests. The conversation, which took place near Agnes's cottage late one evening,
had been about a contract. Alara's voice was low, strained, unlike her usual measured tone, Agnes recounted, her voice a dry whisper. She told him plainly, "I will not sign it, Theron. Your terms are predatory, and I will not put my entire operation under your thumb, no matter the price you offer." Agnes remembered the distinct impression of Theron's cold, smooth rebuttal. "You will find, Alara, that rejecting such a generous offer can be inconvenient, very inconvenient indeed." This was a strange or unexpected detail. The villagers knew that Theron was ambitious, but his dealings with Alara were generally viewed as purely professional. This memory, however, painted a picture of open hostility and a significant financial dispute. Elias realized that the motive might not be a simple act of robbery or a random accident, but a calculated attack rooted in business coercion. Theron's family had always coveted the riverfront land the mill occupied, land crucial for expanding their irrigation canals. Elias pressed her on the wooden box and the A symbol. Agnes studied the carving intently. "That symbol," she mused, tracing the crescent moon with a wrinkled finger. "It is not local, but I remember seeing a ring with that exact mark. It belonged to a factor, a kind of financial agent who visited Alara frequently in the months before she died. A man from the city, well-dressed, always wearing gloves." She remembered that the factor's name was Alastair, and his visits had suddenly stopped just before the fire. The elder's revelation provided a stark, complex view of Alara's life, strained relations with a powerful local figure, and secret dealings with a financial agent from the city. But was Theron's threat mere bluster, or a veiled promise carried out by Alastair? That mysterious question now connected the local resentment to the city's predatory commerce, and Elias felt the case against an accidental fire solidify into an organized scheme.
Armed with the knowledge of Theron's veiled threat and the mysterious financial factor Alastair, Elias shifted his focus from the physical ruins to Alara's business records. He located the mill house office, which, being slightly removed from the main structure, had survived the fire, though it bore the heavy stench of smoke. Here, amidst the tightly organized desk and shelving, he found the old ledger, a massive book bound in worn, dark leather that Alara had used to meticulously record every transaction, every sack of grain milled, and every payment received. Elias spent the better part of 2 days poring over the ledger's contents, his legal training making the dense columns of figures navigable. He was looking for any unusual expenditure, any large debt, or any record of a meeting with Theron or Alastair. Most of the entries were perfectly consistent, following the predictable flow of a successful small-town business. The financial health of the mill, he noted, was robust, confounding any theory that Alara might have resorted to desperate measures or faced overwhelming personal debt. However, as he approached the last weeks recorded, he encountered a strange or unexpected detail that halted his methodical reading. Just 5 days before the night of the fire, there was a significant and unexplainable gap in the entries. It was not just a missing day's work, it was a blank space where a major transaction should have been recorded. Based on the seasonal pattern, the ledger should have detailed the sale of a large shipment of refined flour to the regional cooperative, a transaction that typically accounted for a substantial portion of the mill's quarterly income. The space was blank, the ink dry and untouched. The preceding page ended with a normal entry, and the subsequent page was, tragically, never written upon. This missing transaction posed a critical, mysterious question. Why would Alara, known for her absolute rigor in accounting, omit a major sale? The omission was too deliberate to be an oversight. This led Elias to a profound realization.
This was the clue Alistair's visit and Theron's intimidation had been pointing toward. If Alara had made the sale but chosen not to record it, it suggested she had received the payment in a non-standard form, or perhaps was deliberately keeping the transaction secret from official view. The implication was that she had been forced or coerced into a deal. Elias experienced a powerful, memorable emotional moment of connection with his deceased aunt. He wasn't just reading figures, he was sensing Alara's fear, her shrewdness, and her final desperate attempt to protect her assets from someone predatory. She must have sold the stock, but perhaps decided to conceal the payment, knowing that someone was watching her accounts or planning to seize her assets, whether through legal means or, as now seems likely, criminal ones. He checked the inventory logs, stored separately in a tin box. They confirmed that the flour had indeed been shipped out, signed for by a driver named Jonas, a man Elias did not know. The identity of the purchaser, however, was recorded simply as the collective. But had Alara accepted the payment, or had the flour been taken under duress, with the promise of payment that never materialized, forming a key part of the motive? The missing entry, a void in the data, spoke louder than any accusation. Elias knew he had to confirm the truth of that shipment and the identity of its true recipient.
The missing transaction in the ledger provided Elias with a solid direction, but the local records offered no further insight. To trace the shipment, and more importantly, the intended buyer, the collective, he had to leave the secluded valley. Early the next morning, he made the solitary journey to the regional town, a place bustling with commerce and bureaucratic layers, to visit the town archives. He told no one of his destination, maintaining his carefully constructed facade of a distant, indifferent air. The archives were a dry, silent place, smelling strongly of old paper and dust, a sanctuary for forgotten facts. Elias secured a temporary research pass and requested access to the official records related to the regional cooperative, which managed grain distribution, and the property deeds and insurance filings for Oakhaven Mill. He spent hours meticulously reviewing the brittle documents, cross-referencing dates and names mentioned in Alara's ledger. He confirmed the mill's substantial insurance policy was up to date, paid quarterly with uncharacteristic foresight. However, as he scrutinized the detailed policy document, he stumbled upon a strange or unexpected detail concerning its beneficiaries. While the policy correctly listed Elias as the primary heir to the land and assets, a rider attached just 6 months prior stipulated a considerable cash payout upon total loss of the mill structure itself. This rider's beneficiary was not Elias or the mill's operating fund, but a separate, small, and unfamiliar holding company named Ardor Associates. This was a critical clue. Why would Alara designate a third-party company completely unknown to the village to receive a substantial cash payment specifically triggered by the mill's destruction? It strongly suggested that Alara had been in serious negotiations, possibly under duress, with someone intending to acquire the land by eliminating the structure first. The name Ardor Associates was anonymous, deliberately vague, a front for someone attempting to hide their interest. Elias felt a surge of professional satisfaction mixed with profound unease, a memorable emotional moment. The complex layers of the plot were now revealing themselves. Theron wanted the land. Alistair, the financial factor, was negotiating the sale, and Ardor Associates was the mechanism to profit from the insurance payout. The mill itself had been rendered more valuable dead than alive, its destruction guaranteed by the existence of this rider. He quickly searched the archive's business registrations for Ardor Associates. The paperwork was sparse, but the principal's name was listed A. C. Llewellyn. The initial, A, immediately recalled Alistair, the factor with the engraved ring and the stylized A symbol. The name was likely an alias or a deliberate obfuscation, but the connection was clear. The final troubling piece of this section involved the mill's official valuation. The archives confirmed that the valuation had been inexplicably lowered just 2 weeks prior to the fire, making the subsequent insurance payout to Ardor Associates significantly more enticing. But was Elara complicit in the creation of the insurance rider, or had it been fraudulently arranged by the factor, Alistair Llewellyn, anticipating her refusal to sell? That mysterious question about her degree of involvement was the only thing preventing Elias from drawing a final conclusion. He needed to find the source of the intimidation that had broken his aunt's spirit.
Elias returned to Oakhaven with the knowledge of Ardor Associates and the name A.C. Llewellyn burning in his mind. The final living person who could bridge the gap between Alara's business life and the night of the fire was the former night watchman of the mill. His name was Mr. Silas Thorne, a man who had held his position for nearly 20 years until Alara, for unknown reasons, had replaced him just 2 weeks before the tragedy. Silas had been a fixture, known for his vigilance and reliable routine. Elias located Silas in a small, isolated cabin near the edge of the forest. The man was retired now, living on a modest pension. The meeting was arranged under the pretense of discussing the mill's security protocols for the planned rebuilding, but Elias's true objective was to understand why Alara had dismissed him and what Silas had observed in the final weeks of his employment. Silas was initially cordial, offering Elias a cup of weak tea. But as soon as Elias gently steered the conversation toward the final weeks and the new faces around the mill, the man's demeanor shifted dramatically. His hands, which had been steady, began to tremble noticeably. This was the memorable emotional moment of the encounter, the sheer panic that washed over the old watchman's face, transforming him from a gentle retiree into a terrified, closed-off figure. I cannot speak of that, sir," Silas stammered, his eyes darting toward the narrow window as if expecting a witness. "It is past. It was an accident, as the magistrate declared. I know nothing more." Elias pressed him gently, mentioning the carriage seen by Thomas the farmer and the frequent visits of the city factor, Alistair. Silas flinched violently at the name Alistair. He admitted only to seeing the factor, describing him as a man with eyes that saw too much and said too little. But he steadfastly refused to elaborate on his own dismissal or anything concerning the fire. This sudden, powerful fear was the most potent piece of evidence Elias had found yet. Silas was not merely being discreet, he was genuinely terrified for his life. This suggested that the perpetrators of the arson were not merely greedy, but ruthless, willing to threaten or harm anyone who might expose their crime. It was a strange or unexpected detail that Alara would dismiss a loyal watchman like Silas so close to an alleged deal with Ardor Associates, an act that stripped the mill of its primary protection. Elias concluded that Alara had likely dismissed Silas to protect him, knowing the danger she was in, or perhaps Silas had been forced out because he witnessed something that implicated the factor, Alistair, or the landowner, Theron. Elias placed a small, simple question before Silas, offering a final chance. "Mr. Thorne, did you know that the mill's insurance was manipulated to pay out to a third party upon its destruction?" Silas looked down, his lips pressed into a thin line. He slowly shook his head, a single, silent tear tracking a path down his weathered cheek. "The paperwork, it came from the city. I was told to leave it alone," he whispered, barely audible. He added a crucial final clue. "Ilara kept a leather, a heavy one. She said it was her only protection if things went dark.
She hid it, said it was safer than any vault. But had Silas been warned to remain silent by Alistair, or was his fear rooted in a direct threat from the local figure, Theron? That mysterious question remained, but the mention of a hidden letter gave Elias a clear, immediate target.
Silas Thorne's parting words about the hidden letter resonated with Elias. The immediate task was clear: locate where Elara, a woman who trusted paper more than people, would hide her definitive proof. Elias returned to the Mill House office, the same room where he had found the ledger, now seeing it not as a legal asset, but as a final fortress built by his aunt. He spent hours meticulously examining the furniture. The large, heavy oak desk was the most likely candidate. Its surface was scarred by decades of use, its drawers filled with old correspondence and unused stationery. He checked the usual spots: false bottoms, removable back panels, and the spaces beneath the central drawer. Nothing yielded. The search was becoming frustrating, a slow grind against the silent defiance of the old wood. He felt a moment of deep doubt, wondering if Silas had been mistaken or merely attempting to distract him. Then he recalled a subtle hint from the village elder, Agnes, who had mentioned that Elara was fascinated by mechanisms and small, interlocking puzzles. Elias examined the desk's structure again, this time focusing not on the space, but on the alignment of the wooden joints. He noticed a slight, almost imperceptible discoloration on the bottom edge of the central knee-hole drawer, where the frame met the runners. It was a smudge of old, dark oil, out of place among the lighter sawdust residue. Applying a deliberate, uneven pressure to the drawer front, while simultaneously sliding it open, he felt a faint, mechanical click. This was the strange or unexpected detail that unlocked the secret. A narrow, perfectly concealed slot, previously masked by a thin veneer of wood, sprang open on the far inner side of the knee-hole. Within the dark recess, folded and secured by a stiff leather tie, was the letter, a packet thick with official seals, untouched by the smoke or fire. Elias extracted the document, his hands trembling slightly, a memorable emotional moment where suspense peaked. He carried it to the window and broke the seal. It was not a personal note, but a highly formal, notarized statement. It was a confession and a complete repudiation of the Ardor Associates insurance writer. Elara stated clearly, in her precise hand, that she had been repeatedly threatened by the financial factor Alistair Llewellyn, who was acting on behalf of Mr. Thaleron. The threats, she detailed, centered on exposing a minor but legally inconvenient oversight in the mill's ancient land rights. The document revealed that Alistair had blackmailed her into signing the insurance rider, with the assurance that the mill structure would be destroyed to clear the land for Theron's expansion, but that she would be safely relocated. However, she suspected Alistair had no intention of letting her live, fearing her future testimony. In a brilliant final act of defense, she had written this notarized letter, detailing the conspiracy and, crucially, revealing that she had also secretly recorded the final conversation with Alistair concerning the arson plan and had stored the recording medium with her lawyer in the capital. The letter was dated 1 day before the fire, explaining the mystery of Silas's dismissal and her desperate need for security. But had Alistair received the letter before the fire, forcing him to act preemptively and more brutally? Or did he think Elara had simply complied with his demands? That mysterious question was less important than the truth now held in Elias's hands. The ghost of revenge was not an apparition, but the simple, unassailable truth of a final legal document.
The discovery of Elara's notarized letter provided Elias with the final, conclusive pieces of the narrative.
He no longer held clues or suspicions. He held the absolute truth, a conspiracy involving the greed of the local landowner, Theron, and the predatory malice of the city factor, Alastair Llewellyn. The simple desire for revenge was transformed into a clear path toward justice. Elias knew he could not present this evidence to the local authorities. The magistrate had already dismissed the case, and the powerful influence of Theron in the valley was a known factor. A quiet, calculated confrontation was required, one that would expose the truth before the conspirators could destroy the evidence or intimidate him further. He arranged a meeting through a neutral third party with Mr. Theron, claiming he wished to discuss the rapid sale of the mill land to expedite his departure from Oakhaven. The meeting took place not in the mill house, but in the neutral ground of the village meeting hall, which ensured a few watchful, though distant witnesses from the community. Elias wore his most composed, legal demeanor, appearing ready to capitulate to the inevitable. When Theron arrived, he was accompanied by a severe-looking man whom Elias immediately recognized from Agnes's description. A clean-shaven, watchful individual, wearing fine clothes and thin leather gloves. Alastair Llewellyn. Theron, confident and arrogant, began the conversation by offering a laughably low price for the land, citing the unfortunate liability of the recent destruction. Elias listened in silence, letting Theron and Alastair implicate themselves further by detailing the future plans for the land, revealing their certainty that the mill structure would never be rebuilt. This moment was a memorable emotional moment, the quiet intensity of Elias's control against the conspirators' overconfidence. Then Elias leaned forward. He pulled the thick leather-tied packet from his briefcase and placed it squarely on the table between them. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly across the room, "before we discuss this transaction, I must ask you to consider the legal implications of a fraudulent total loss claim filed under duress." Alastair's face went pale, his composure cracking instantly. Theron, whose shock was slower but more profound, attempted bluster. "I have no idea what you speak of, young man. That is defamation." Elias ignored him, addressing Alastair directly. "The Ardor Associates Rider, Mr. Llewellyn, signed by my aunt Ilara, but subsequently and publicly repudiated in a notarized statement detailing your threats, Theron's involvement, and your plan to commit arson and insurance fraud." He slid the document across the table. When Alastair frantically snatched it and saw the notary seals, he understood the gravity of his miscalculation. He had failed to account for Ilara's methodical mind and her ability to create a counter-defense. This realization that their whole elaborate scheme had been undermined by a single sheet of paper was the strange or unexpected detail that broke the confrontation. Theron stared at the factor with cold fury. He realized his fate rested in the hands of a subordinate who had clearly botched the cover-up. But was the recorded confession still secure with the lawyer, or had Alastair already made arrangements to retrieve it, making this documentation the last of the evidence? That mysterious question gave Elias one final leverage point, forcing him to mention the one thing they could not immediately check. "And if this is not enough, my aunt also secured a sound recording of your final exchange, which is currently secured with a lawyer in the capital city, awaiting its official presentation." The confrontation did not end with a loud denunciation, but with a quiet, heavy silence. Theron, the ambitious landowner, realized the factor, Alastair, had severely compromised their scheme. The mention of the secure sound recording, whether true or a clever ruse, was enough. The risk of the notarized letter and the recording entering the public domain, combined with Elias's composed confidence, shattered their control over the narrative. Within 48 hours, the consequences of Elias's revelations began to unfold. Elias, using the leverage of the notarized letter, quietly contacted the proper city authorities, not the local magistrate, but a more distant legal office with jurisdiction over large-scale insurance fraud. He provided them with a copy of the letter and the crucial details about Ardor Associates. The evidence was irrefutable. Alistair Llewellyn, sensing the impending collapse, attempted a hasty flight, but was apprehended. Theron, entangled by the testimony and the undeniable paper trail, soon faced the inevitable legal investigation into conspiracy and arson. The quiet return to order in Oakhaven was palpable. The village, which had been smothered by suspicion and grief, now breathed a collective sigh of relief. The ghost of Alara's revenge was revealed not as a haunting apparition, but as the enduring strength of her own meticulous preparation and foresight. Justice was revealed not through dramatic acts, but through the patient, methodical work of uncovering truth. Elias, the distant nephew, was now seen in a new light. He was no longer the cold city man, but the quiet, determined champion who had cleared Alara's name and restored the village's peace. This was the final, satisfying, memorable, emotional moment for the community. Barnaby, the little terrier, now fully healed, adopted Elias with the fierce loyalty he had once shown Alara, a symbol of the broken pieces beginning to mend. The legal process was lengthy but certain. Theron and Alistair were held accountable for the planned arson and insurance fraud. The mill's insurance payout was correctly redirected to Elias as the rightful heir, and the fraudulent Ardor Associates was dismantled. The land, which Theron had so ruthlessly coveted, remained under the control of the Oakhaven community through Elias. Elias faced a choice: sell the land and return to his comfortable life in the city, or stay and honor his aunt's legacy. He walked the grounds repeatedly, contemplating the blackened stones and the resilience of the surrounding forest. He spoke with Agnes, the elder, and with Silas Thorne, a former watchman, who, relieved of his terrible burden, finally shared the full extent of the intimidation. He listened to the quiet pleas of the villagers, whose lives depended on the mill's function. He made his decision. He would stay. He used the insurance funds not for personal gain, but for the rebuilding of the mill. He commissioned the finest local stonemasons and carpenters. The new structure was designed to be stronger, safer, and even more efficient than the old one, a lasting monument to Alara's enduring spirit. This decision, a strange or unexpected detail to those who expected him to sell, cemented his connection to Oakhaven. But was the peace of the valley truly restored, or would the long shadow of Theron's influence linger? That mysterious question was answered by Elias's commitment. He installed Silas Thorne back in his position, not just as a watchman, but as a trusted partner, guaranteeing the mill's security and its honest operation. The sun set slowly over the valley of Oakhaven, painting the sky in hues of soft gold and lavender. The air was cool now, carrying the clean, honest scent of fresh-cut oak and river water, the heavy smell of ash long gone. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the new mill wheel turning was a comforting sound, a heartbeat returning to the village. Elias stood on the new porch, watching the last sliver of daylight fade behind the ridge. He was dressed simply now, his city clothes replaced by the sturdy linen of a working man. Barnaby slept curled securely at his feet, no longer frantic, but utterly at peace. Elias had found in Oakhaven a home, and in his aunt's legacy a purpose far richer than any legal career could offer him. He had not sought revenge, he had sought justice, and in doing so he had healed a community and, perhaps, a long-forgotten part of himself. The mill stood taller and brighter than before, a symbol of resilience and the quiet, persistent victory of truth over malice. The work was demanding, but the flour it produced was the sustenance of a grateful community. He looked out over the fields where the farmers were preparing for the next harvest, their faces reflecting the hope of a stable future. The valley was silent now, a deep, restful silence that signaled not absence, but contentment. He closed his eyes, the cool evening air a soft balm on his face, knowing the tale of the ghost who wanted revenge had found its happy ending in the quiet act of building something new and good.